Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Muhammad Reza Zaini from the University of Indonesia, and I will present my research, which is a case study of ethnic and nation identities in Tangerang Regency in Banten Province, Indonesia. Okay, so these are the researchers, and the lead researcher was Mr. Iqbal Jayadi, but unfortunately, Mr. Jayadi passed away earlier this year, so I was replaced to present this research. Okay, so before I start, what does the topic actually means? Frankly, the title of this research is a literal representation of how a certain non-Chinese community became Chinese Indonesians, as exemplified on this picture taken from a comic book about an ethnic Chinese American who has a more Caucasianized identity. So this is the flow of the presentation. Okay, so this research is the response of mainstream Chinese studies in Indonesia, which generally see Chinese Indonesians as one cultural identity. In addition of the common notion that Chinese identity is a taken for granted thing, this means that we try to examine how an individual achieves ethnic Chinese identity as his or her new identity, as a counter-argument to the notion that Chinese identity is embedded as a fixed thing within an individual. We also would like to conduct a research about the little-known diversity of Chinese Indonesian identity. We took Cina Benteng community in western part of Java as a case study. Before we begin, we have to know who Cina Bentengs really are. So there are the descendants of early Chinese immigrants around 15th and 17th centuries in Tangerang, Western Java. Most of them are male, so they intermarried with local native women, which is the origin of their identity. They still practice rudimentary form of Chinese culture with native way of living. So that's why in Indonesia, Cina Benteng is still considered as Chinese, or as ethnic Chinese, or what is generally known in Southeast Asia as Peranakan Chinese, or culturally assimilated Chinese. They settle what will become the present-day Tangerang Regency. So that's why they are identical with the region itself. And these are some pictures of Cina Benteng. Cina Benteng refers to a wide population of assimilated Chinese around the town. Okay, in Situ Gadung village, there are Cina Benteng community living in the village. But what makes them to be distinctive from other Cina Benteng is that they used to identify themselves closer to the indigenous identity. In fact, almost indigenous in every social aspect and also in biological aspect. This identity is known as orang keturunan. So please note that orang keturunan is not a part of Chinese identity. However, as a result of long process, they began to identify themselves as Cina Benteng, which is a part of Chinese identity in Indonesia. So, how is their unique process and how we analyze it? That's what we're trying to answer. Okay, this qualitative social research employs grounded methodology, meaning that we didn't begin with abstract theories and try to see the social phenomenon with a theory. Instead, we begin with analyzing the issue on the field and then try to analyze it into a more abstract explanation. So I will skip the methodology and we can discuss it in the question and answer session. However, I'm going to give a short background about our theoretical basis. So basically, we're talking about ethnic identity and as a social collectivity. Ethnic identity is defined as a sense of belonging where each member of a certain group is considered to share the same origin and cultural traits. And ethnic identity its function, according to Suparlan, is linked to a survival method of an individual social group in the society. So here, ethnic identity is some kind of social adaptation. We can say it's like a social adaptation system where an individual adapt to their social niche. Okay, so social collectivity. So social collectivity, according to Collar, is an individual or a collective effort to identify themselves as a means to distinguish their identity among other individual or social collectives or any persons outside their perceived group. So we can say that ethnic identity is one of the manifestations of social collectivity. But the question is, There is a case that Chinese community did not consider themselves as part of China Benteng. So what kind of phenomenon is this? Is this a phenomenon of ethnic identity, social collectivity, or what? Okay, this is the our research area. Here's a map of Java Island. The red circle indicates Tangerang. Now, this is a zoomed version of the red circle, which highlights the cultural area of China Benteng. The red dot over there is where this is the village where we conduct this research. So it's pretty close to the capital city. Okay, now moving on to the findings. Here we can see how Chinese immigrants from the 15th and the 17th centuries were one of the pioneering settlers of Tangerang. As you can see, I took this picture of this old grave and also this temple, which is among the oldest Chinese temple, not only in Tangerang but also in Java. So you can see that Tangerang is not originated from native Indonesian words. It's originated from Tanglan, from Chinese dialects, which is meaning a person from the Tang dynasty. Okay. So Situ Gadung village is a part of Tangerang Regency. It's bordered by Bumi Serpong Damai, a middle-class gated community built in the 1980s. Most of the Bumi Serpong Damai residents are Chinese descent from urban centers. Situ Gadung's original name traces its origin to Chinese culture. It was once called Kampung Amoy. So Amoy is like a young woman in local Chinese dialects. Before Indonesianized into Situ Gadung after the country's independence in 1945. So here's a map of the village. The red stripes represents the village lot acquired by the Bumi Serpong Damai. So I'm gonna pronounce Bumi Serpong Damai as BSD. Okay, acquired by the BSD. So the black arrow here points the picture taken on the right side. So you can see how the village is squeezed by the gated community, by the middle class gated community. Okay. Okay. So the village neighbors Sampora village on the west. Okay. Sampora also has a Chinese community originated from the same ancestors with those of Situ Gadung village. However, contrary to the Chinese community in Situ Gadung, the Chinese community in Sampora were transformed into natives. So I will explain why the same community in Sampora and Situ Gadung will be diverged into two different identities. How did they get separated? As explained earlier, they used to originate from the same ancestors. But the orang keturunan in Sampora became natives, and the orang keturunan in Situ Gadung became Chinese. This started during the Japanese occupation and was triggered during the Indonesian War of Independence against the Dutch. To save the time, I will speed up with this explanation. Because during this time there was a rumor that the Chinese locals were loyal to the Dutch, and the armed forces and civilians began the anti-Chinese riots. This triggered a previously non-existent prejudice toward the assimilated Chinese. Survivors recalled how they seek refuge to the family elders of the same Chinese surnames. Coincidentally, the elders of the Yap, and Sim families settled in Sampora, and the elders of the Tan, Li, and Te families settled in Situ Gadung. In Sampora, the local native leader protected the local Chinese and taught them to assimilate even more to the natives. This made orang keturunan who reside in Sampora became more natives. However, in Situ Gadung, the Dutch army managed to send the Chinese into the internment camps because at this time the Dutch invaded Indonesia as a mean to regain Indonesia as their colonial territory after World War II. They were released after the Dutch retreated from Indonesia in 1949. However, most of them were fearful of the natives and unable to create an intense interaction ever since. So, when the BSD was built in the 1980s and the urban Chinese began to settle, their interaction enabled the Chinese identity socialization to the orang keturunan in Situ Gadung. Okay, so this is a picture of me. Okay, how many minutes left? Okay, there are several identifications found in the village. Okay, so this first one is China Benteng. I will explain China Benteng, and then the second one is orang keturunan, the native China Benteng. orang Islam adalah orang keturunan who converted to Islam and therefore will become native. And pribumi means native in Indonesia, and this is a photograph of me and a local Chinese. Please note that he looks more like native Indonesians compared to me as a native. So here's a story, so I'm gonna skip it. How a local Chinese who were able to change his identity from orang keturunan, from an identity which is closer to the native identity, became Chinese by converting to Christianity. And here, take a look at this. By changing their socio-cultural traits from adherence to non-Christian beliefs, engage in agriculture, low socio-economic status, and rural dweller, and then they change it to adherence to Christianity, and engage in business and trades, high socio-economic status, and urban wealth. They are considered to be more Chinese. So when you take a look at the bottom table, please note that the mastery of Chinese languages or cultural practice is not considered as precondition to achieve Chinese identity. However, the orang keturunan community in Sambora village, they can be identified and identify themselves as native by just changing their religion. So this indicates that they are indeed closer to the indigenous identity. Note that only few traits needed to become natives. Okay, so this unique identification is a result of both Indonesia's and local socio-economic background. Okay, so because it's shortage of the time, I'm gonna skip it. So from this explanation, we can ask two sociological questions. What defines Chineseness to some extent? Is it the physical traits? Is it the mastery of Chinese language, or what? So the second sociological question that we can ask is, what kind of cultural or identity transformation is this? You can see from this picture. From the yellow one represents Chinese identity to represent the color of the Chinese, and then the brown represents the color of the native Indonesians, the color of the skin of the ethnic Indonesians. You can see that they're almost becoming native, but to some extent, because of some social changes, they become more Chinese. So, yeah, this is the conclusions. This is just the overall process of becoming Chinese. Okay, so as a further, this is just the backgrounds of how they can achieve their Chinese identity because of historical events combined with infrastructural changes, demographic changes, economic changes, which eventually triggered their decision to become Cina Benteng. So Cina is Chinese in Indonesian language. So there are three phases to become Cina Benteng here. The first one is socialization from the Chinese community, and then the second one is affiliation, how they feel affiliated with a certain community, whether they feel affiliated with the Chinese or the native. And third is significance. They feel that the Chinese identity is more significant than becoming orang keturunan of other communities, or other identities.